Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. Last week, Putin got a new constitution. And I say Putin because it was really Putin's constitution. It was really the Russian constitution got amended, but it was pretty much Putin's constitution. So, for general context, with the fall of the Soviet Union, you had the Russian Federation stood up and has had the same constitution amended multiple times. There's been 3 major amendments, all of them sort of trying to grapple with this concept of to what extent are we, we call it a republic, a democracy, a federation, versus an authoritarian single man rule. And pretty much every single one you can chart. I think it was like the late 90s, 2005, and then a couple ones more recently, has been on a general trend of reducing autonomy, freedoms, control of parliament, and strengthening the strong man in the regime, which has right now been Putin. What is the Russian constitution now? What were the amendments putting it? It really comes down to 4 things that were emphasized in this constitution. One is continuismo. The other was sort of a nativist approach. The third was reducing parliament's power, and the first were some sort of teasers. So the ostensibly, at least, this constitution still needs to be passed by plebiscite. It still needs to go to a vote. It needs to get votes. So there were 3 things that were designed to sort of increase the power of the presidency, and a 4th bucket that was designed to sort of entice voters, I guess. And so let's walk through them. The phrase continuismo actually comes from Latin America. It's the concept of a governmental or civilian or military leader who refuses to step down when their time is due. And it means, its translation is continuance or continuing, right? It's the concept of a single leader who refuses to yield power. And it's a real problem for democracies and republics, because as their terms go on longer, these executive heads of state get more and more power. They accumulate more and more strings of control. If you don't cut that off, they eventually don't want to leave, and then you got to wait till they die, and you end up in a situation like in Latin America or some of these African countries where you have a 90-year-old dictator everyone's just waiting to die. And as I've said before, there is no one who lives longer in the world than a dictator you hope dies of old age. Those guys live forever. A counterexample to continuismo is George Washington, a very famous counterexample. He could have held power. There was nothing prohibiting him from going to a 3rd term. He probably would have run. But by surrendering after the 2nd term, he really created an informal tradition of not going for continuismo. You serve your terms, you do your 2 terms, you step back. FDR obviously served 3 terms, and that caused a lot of concerns that we were reaching a continuismo. We passed an amendment which now limits presidential terms for 2 terms. This is why, no matter who recommends it, I always get itchy when someone says, hey, let's have a 3rd term. Like, nope, 2 terms and you're out for president. Continuismo in Russia is very much about keeping Putin in power. So the first thing they did is they removed an in a row clause. There was basically saying you can't have so many presidential terms in a row, because before Putin, there was a provision that you couldn't have so many presidential terms in a row. So Putin was in power, and then Medvedev took over, but Putin was still the puppet master. And then after that, Putin came back in. They just did away with that. Now you can keep going. Doesn't matter if it's all in a row. They also, if that wasn't enough, they nullified the previous terms both Vladimir Putin and former President Dmitry Medvedev have served. So in a way, they said, oh, those previous terms, mulligan, those don't count for counting purposes. And they both can now serve their 1st term. These guys have been pretty much, Putin's been in power since the 2000s, but Medvedev did his turn for a couple years there. Both of these folks can run for their 1st term in 2024, and under the current structure now with the newly amended constitution, they can basically stay in power till 2036. Well, if you're looking at Putin age, he's going to be 83 years old at 2036. And this is the classic case of continuismo, maneuvering the constitution so they can stay in power. Another change is sort of a nativist change where they put in a lot of language about you can never have been a foreign resident or for a foreign citizenship. That's not unusual. That's kind of like the US. You can't be president if you were foreign born. They also added even if you renounce former residence or citizenships. This is kind of a hedge against some of the oligarchs who have had split residencies, split citizenships because of economic reasons in the 90s. They basically got citizenship in a European country, but now they're going to be forbidden from holding power. That's really the only threat to holding president. I mean, besides a revolution, which is unlikely right now. But the main threat to Putin's power is the oligarchs. This is, again, further designed to sort of do that. They reduced Parlin's power. The current and former presidents are now effectively immune from prosecution, which we kind of knew informally, but has now been formalized. The law enforcement heads are appointed directly, even at lower levels, are now appointed directly by the president with just a consultation. They've consolidated the state council, which is sort of a quasi body that's not official, but this makes it official. It reports basically to Putin as an advisory group that's his cronies basically. And, you know, just so Putin doesn't always have to tell everyone what to do, they've made it that the Constitutional Court can check laws adopted by the parliament before the president even has to sign them. So in the US, if you think about it, Congress passes a law, the president can veto it or not, and after that, the Supreme Court, upon a case withstanding, will determine the constitutionality. In the Russian system now, the parliament passes a law, the president can ask the Supreme Court, which he picked, to say nullify that law, and he doesn't have to actually veto it. Again, pretty much consolidating power. And the teasers, so to try and entice people for this obvious power grab, they basically threw in some nice to haves. They made the minimum wage cannot be lower than the subsistence minimum, which is kind of not going to help because you can always have a minimum wage, but with inflation and the current inflationary status, the rubles, it's like, yeah, you can have a minimum wage, but you're not going to be able to buy anything with it. They're going to index pensions. Again, with inflation, I don't know how much that will help. They passed 2 amendments. One was a defense of marriage, where they defined marriage as only between a man and a woman. And they asserted that Russia's faith in God, you know, sort of going back to the Orthodox Christianity hallmarks. Interestingly enough, a lot of the polling indicated that these teasers did not really incentivize people one way or another. There wasn't like a huge outcry. Yes, we need to define marriage as between a man and a woman. For the most part, it fell along political lines. There was probably 78% voted yes, 20-something% voted no, and it generally fell with what you'd expect as Putin having 3/4 of the country basically under his thumb. So new constitution for Russia, but kind of a continuing of a trend of this consolidation. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the Info Mullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the Info Mullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.